Well, I'm here with an old friend of mine, Steve Rose, who, I don't know, came to me to take guitar lessons 20 or 30 years ago or something like that.
Way back.
Yeah, and as the years went on, he's moved away and was gone for quite a while. Haven't seen him too much till recently when his nephew started taking lessons. But we always had a lot of fun at his lessons talking about music and things because we had a lot of similar tastes, and Steve has some pretty eclectic tastes too that he's going to share with us a little bit today. So, Steve, thanks for dropping by.
My pleasure. It's always fun chatting with you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you've been a music fan, I'm sure, since you were a teenager, probably. What do you first remember hearing?
It could have been something like Wooly Bully by Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs. Hey There, Little Red Riding Hood.
And did that inspire you to want to play the guitar?
That's got some pretty cool licks in it. You know, all that early 60s stuff that came out of the folk movement, they've got some nice guitar licks in there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was pretty cool. So, and then of course the Beatles came along, and
the Beatles, The Summer of Love, and preceding The Summer of Love, the Sunset Strip. Los Angeles. You can't forget the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield.
Yeah, it kind of showed up 65, 66, all still pretty wannabe Beatles kind of things to a certain extent.
Definitely the Byrds and Roger McGuinn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but you've listened to a lot of unusual things since then. You kind of got into some. What are you listening to lately?
I guess we're going to talk about surf rock. That's absolutely my favorite form of music. I think, we can all pretty much agree it's what we all aspire to be able to play. I like jazz, but the cool thing about jazz is the chords. And you take those jazz chords and play them in a surf tune, and you've got some pretty interesting chord progressions you can come up with.
Yeah.
Getting away from the standard, three-chord progression that the earlier surf rock songs were known for.
Yeah. So, the birth of surf rock. Tell me about that.
Well, everything is derived from what preceded it. So you had the bands in the 50s like Duane Eddy and Link Wray playing instrumental rock. And then what happened in Southern California was the surfers would have their parties after a day of surfing. And specifically, there's a club called the Rendezvous Ballroom in Newport Beach where Dick Dale played around 1961. And a lot of sources will tribute that to the location and time of the birth of surf rock music.
And would Dick claim that he invented it? Or at least...
Maybe popularized it.
Yeah, yeah. It's probably a better way of...
his first tune was Let's Go Trippin', and then, of course, Miserlou.
Yeah.
And Dick Dale, he might be Moroccan, I'm not certain about that, but he does have some Middle Eastern background. And Miserlou, I believe, is a Moroccan folk tune that he just basically jazzed up and played loud and fast. And
because it's an unusual scale. It's got some unusual intervals in it. That it definitely has a non-Western sound because it's got half steps in unusual places in the scale.
Okay.
So we'll save the theory for another
I
day.
know this is our lesson right here.
Yeah. Let's analyze Miserlou.
Yeah.
So, so Dick. Yeah, so in the early 60s, I mean, like really early 60s, 59 and 60 probably is when he was probably influenced by Duane Eddy and those guys, do you think?
I would think so. The instrumental rock that was popular in the mid to late 50s, I think he took and then played it. He had a relationship with Leo Fender, and so he got a hold of some of those early Fender amps with the reverb, and that was a lot of what characterized surf rock was those Fender Stratocaster guitars and those Fender amps.
Yeah.
Heavy on the reverb.
Right. That's because, like what it sounds like underwater or something.
Well, and that's the whole deal with the surf music, is it's supposed to, bring back memories or emulate perhaps the experience of surfing.
Yeah. I was going to ask something else about. Oh, so back to Duane Eddy for a second. So his, he was probably a little more country flavored or something, right? Or influenced.
That's fair.
Because and like a little less rock kind of stuff in there, not necessarily using as many blues chords, like seventh chords and things, as more straight ahead. I mean, they could be 1-4-5 progressions, but it was more, I think, in that little slightly more country style, right?
Right, like 100 Miles of Bad Road is one of my favorite Duane Eddy songs, and that's definitely a country sounding tune.
Yeah.
Whereas Link Wray, he's known for songs like Rumble, which I think are much more blues based.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And then it seemed like in Southern California, everybody and his brother had a band in their garage.
Yeah, yeah.
Because pretty soon, one thing that seemed pretty cool. Now, one thing Dick I think added too was this tremolo picking. You know, more again, kind of a Middle Eastern sound, because it's something common that mandolin players would do.
Okay.
You know,
Right.
And not necessarily so maybe a little more even Italian or Greek influence there, because some of those instruments like a mandolin has very quick decay. So you hit a note and it dies off really quick. You know, so now you keep going to keep it ringing like a violin would or something.
Uh-huh.
You know, but it seemed like that was one of his contributions to the whole thing. Was that rapid tremolo.
His trademark.
Yeah, yeah, and that was what it took to make Miserlou kind of a hit, I think.
Well, it really made the song stand out.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was very distinctive,
and then
it
of course
still is.
It is, yeah, and still with and then it was the rock beat that he gave it, kind of just formed this whole style. Now it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and so a lot of people will call that the first wave of surf music, and then the groups like the Beach Boys and the Jan and Deans came along, and they'll call that the second wave.
Because it had the addition of vocals.
Exactly.
Then. And so that's, yeah. And you can't really say that they're not surf stuff, because they had, their topics were surf related things, you know.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
Although I've heard the Beach Boys hated that tag.
Yeah.
They wanted to be called the Pendletons.
Yeah.
And I think it was the record company that said, no, you're the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And I don't think they were pleased at all about it, but that was what was fashionable at the time.
Yeah.
And it made them all big stars.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course they were influenced, you know, Brian was influenced a lot by the Four Freshmen, who were more of an a cappella, well, I guess they were an a cappella group, you know, basically a jazzy barbershop quartet.
Right.
Kind of thing. And that's
coming out of the doo-wop groups of New
Right.
York in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons.
Yeah, yeah, and then he took that to another level using harmonies that were just you know, unheard of at the time, and then they all had these voices that just could carry. It was unbelievable, you know, the sound that they came up with.
Right, and the Beach Boys really did a nice job with their harmonies, and a lot of other bands, like Chicago, for instance, invited the Beach Boys to play with them on their albums. Wishing You Were
Oh yeah.
Here?
Yeah, Wishing You Were Here was one of their, you know, they were a band that I don't want to go too far into them right now, but they were a band that went through a lot of incarnations and eventually had to change their sound because the record company told them, we're not doing this jazzy rock stuff anymore. We need hits. You know, and so from about the fourth album on, it was they had still a few cool ones on the fifth, and one or two on the sixth was getting out there, and then, you know, and pretty soon by the eighth, ninth, 10th, they were doing Wishing You Were Here and these drippy ballads.
Right,
you know?
right.
But they've sort of resurrected themselves with a couple of Christmas albums that still have the big horn sections, and then also with a big band album, where they do even songs like Chicago, Chicago. You know, not surprisingly. Anyway, we'll save the Chicago discussion for another day.
Right.
But I want to get back to one more thing about the garage type bands, because one thing that was pretty cool about surf stuff too was it was not, except, I mean, Dick Dale a little bit an exception here, but a lot of the early hits were not guitar virtuoso songs. They were songs that would pretty much, you could play the guitar for a few months and probably play most of that stuff. You learn a couple of chords and you come up with a cool little melody, do 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 do, but you come up with, you know, which is obviously stolen from a Dick Dale sound.
Right.
You know, the descending, the glissando thing that opens up Pipeline. But it seemed like there were a lot of these bands that all came up with one hit, you know, one song that everybody will remember them for.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that all these classic surf tunes were originally done by different bands, and you have never heard another song by that same band. You know, obviously the Shantays and the Surfaris stuck around a little bit more, I think. But so were you listening to that stuff?
Definitely
Pretty much.
Wipeout. I remember Wipeout from the 60s.
Yeah.
Walk, Don't Run, I remember from the 60s. Not Dick Dale so much.
Yeah.
Maybe his songs preceded me.
Yeah. I think, you know, like the band that really brought most of them to my attention, I mean, I knew them as surf songs, but of course the Ventures kind of, sort of like Dick Dale, brought it to another level. You know, partly by doing all of the songs. I mean, they pretty much covered every song ever written in the history of, you know, Western civilization.
Right.
Including Jim Croce and the country, you know, Marty Robbins. I mean, they've put out a ton of stuff.
Well, didn't they do the Hawaii 5-0 theme?
Yeah, yeah, and that was their really their only original like claim to fame.
Okay.
You know, but they popularized Walk Don't Run. That was of course written by Johnny Smith about 5 or 6 years before, and
Okay.
recorded by even Chet Atkins and people like that. But they that song, which also came out in 1960, so that's also really early, had a lot to do with establishing the surf sound, I think, because if you hear Johnny Smith's version, it's like a straight ahead jazz tune. It doesn't sound anything like what the Ventures did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
They surfified it.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, that theme from Hawaii 5-0 is stunning. I think it is pretty cool.
That was catchy.
Yeah, yeah.
The drums, the
Yeah.
drums really make that song, and the
Yeah.
horn section. I mean, for surf to have a horn section like that
yeah,
is pretty advanced at the time.
yeah, yeah, and that was about 68 or 67, I think. when that show
Whenever
was
the
on.
program, yeah.
Yeah, it's resurrected nowadays. Of course, I haven't seen any of the new episodes. I don't know where it, but I keep meaning to catch one sometime. But anyway,
Well, if it had a better theme song, maybe we'd
Yeah.
watch it.
Yeah.
Mission Impossible.
yeah,
You think back a lot of those old shows in the '60s, and you think about the theme song.
there were some pretty amazing themes. Classic ones. One people ask me about on the site all the time that I've never got around to a lesson for is the MASH theme. It opens up with a nice little guitar thing.
Right.
On a B
right.
minor chord and stuff. But then it makes a nice little instrumental and stuff. But yeah, TV themes. Another whole different subject. We could save that for next year or next.
Spy themes. They associate surf with spy music, evidently because the James Bond film Dr. No had a lot of surf instrumentals in it. So a lot of times with these surf bands, they'll do some spy stuff, and evidently that dates back to the Dr. No film.
Yeah, yeah, wow. Yeah. So, was anybody doing new surf stuff in the 70s or 80s? 70s?
Yeah, it really, I think, had died out
Yeah.
by then.
And
Maybe
become sort of a
some
dinosaur.
some of the bands may have been playing the carnival circuit.
Yeah.
Doing the fairs out at Santa Cruz in the summertime.
Yeah.
But I don't think there were any big surf hits,
Yeah.
any popular surf albums.
Like a lot of styles, one of my favorite is progressive rock, and it sort of runs in waves, and it dies for 10 or 15 years, and then it comes back, and stuff,
But
and
jazz fell by the wayside, in the 70s and 80s, and it was really Japan that kept jazz alive, and maybe to a lesser extent Europe. But a lot of those jazz musicians had to leave the U.S.
Yeah.
because there just wasn't work for them over here.
Yeah.
And whereas it took off in some of the other countries, now jazz is coming back, and
Right.
we've got some great local jazz clubs like Yoshi's and the Bach Dynamite Society.
yeah, yeah. So when did surf start coming back?
It seems
Or
like
is it back?
Yeah, I think it's back. I don't know if it's growing, but it definitely seems to have reestablished itself as a niche.
Yeah.
And at least with some of what they're now calling third wave bands, I think late 80s. I've seen some people attribute the third wave to the film Pulp Fiction, but that came out in '94. And Quentin Tarantino used some Dick Dale and some other oldies in his soundtrack, and a lot of people say that helped revive surf music. But some of the third wave bands came out in the late 80s, so they preceded it, and they may have influenced Quentin Tarantino.
You'd think so. It's kind of like they saw that people were or an interest was resurging in this or something.
Right, and he's always kind of had his finger on the pulse of what's current.
Yeah.
So he could have seen that and decided to use it. He might have thought it would be kind of cool to throw a few surf tunes into his film.
Yeah, and I vaguely remember a few 80s punk bands doing some surf.
Agent
stuff.
Orange?
Yeah, that's the main one that comes to mind. And they did like a couple classic ones, right? I mean, they did like Pipeline or something, and then probably had some others that sounded like it. I don't remember.
Yeah, I
much.
don't have their album. It's one I've meant to pick up and never gotten around to, because I
Yeah.
think they mix a lot of vocals in there as well.
Oh, okay.
But KFJC used to have a surf program every Saturday night, and they would invite these bands in to play live on the radio. And certainly I remember the night Agent Orange played, and they did a very, punkish,
Yeah.
but definitely third wave surf.
Yeah. Yeah. But now there are a lot of, like 5 years ago, which was almost the last time I saw you probably, you gave me a couple of contemporary surf bands, John and the Night Riders, I think, and Pollo Del Mar.
Pollo Del Mar, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Chicken of the sea.
Chicken of the Sea, for those that speak Spanish. And John and the Night Riders is the same in English as Spanish, I think, right? And they had a pretty traditional sound to a great extent.
Right. Surf revivalists.
Yeah, the neo-surf wave or something.
Mm-hmm.
And are there a lot of bands like that? Or is that a small little niche too?
No, I think that currently you could probably divide it evenly between the bands that are surf revivalist bands. San Diego's got one called the Secret Samurai, and I got to see them a couple of times. And they're just straight early '60s surf rock.
Okay, yeah. And then there are some kind of pushing the envelope a little bit.
Yes, exactly. That's where I come in.
Yeah. So a week or two ago, you walked in with to your nephew's lesson with an album by the Mermen.
Exactly, San Francisco band, I believe.
Yeah, it looks like, I did a lot of research on them after listening to it, because I popped on the album In God We Trust, I think it was, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it had and it was not at all what I expected. It sounded more like it took a while for the first song to sort of fade in, like very Pink Floyd-y or something.
To me that first song sounds like something off Wish You Were Here.
Yeah.
But the album in general sounds like side 2 of Metal. If you're familiar, that's my favorite Pink Floyd album. I just love those long extended jams.
Yeah, that's the and that piece that's Echoes you're talking about.
Echoes, okay.
Which is the 24-minute
right,
thing that really is a little symphonic thing, and it really set the stage. That was actually Pink Floyd finally getting their act together after 5 or 6 albums worth of
experiment.
Of like trying to figure out where we're going and stuff like that, and that led directly into Dark Side of the Moon, which came out 2 years later, I think. They had a few other things in between, but they were still kind of floundering. But if anybody's if the first album they've heard of Pink Floyd is Dark Side of the Moon, they definitely need to go back to Metal to see where it came from. And
which is really 2 albums in a way. Side 1's all acoustic.
Yeah, these acoustic songs. There's only 4 of them, I think, on there too, and they're actually really cool. Yeah,
absolutely. I love that album.
Yeah, and it was kind of it was even an improvement on the previous one, which was Adam Hart Mother. They had a very long suite on there, but it had horns on it. It was also kind of disjointed, but interesting, And then there's the 3 or 4 really early ones. But getting back to the Mermen, tell me about them. Give me the story of the band as far as you know it.
Led by Jim Thomas on guitar. It's a 3-piece, guitar, bass, and drums. Formed, I believe, in '89, or at least their first album was '89.
Yeah.
And they've got 5 or 6 records out now. The name comes from a Jimi Hendrix song, and that's off the Electric Ladyland album. I think it's called it's called 1984, A Merman I Wish to Be.
Oh, that's the name of the song.
That's the name of the song, yeah. 1984,
okay.
Then parentheses, A Merman I Wish to Be.
Okay.
And so they're basically broadcasting their influence, and I've always thought of the Mermen as a band that sounded like what Jimi Hendrix would sound like if he played surf rock. They can get loud and they can get distorted and they can play very fast, very aggressively, but at the same time, just like Hendrix, they can use some beautiful slow ballads.
Yeah.
And some of my favorite tunes by both bands are the ballads more than the out of control rock stuff.
Yeah, definitely an interesting sound. And then just the other day, you gave me an earlier album of theirs.
Food for Fish.
Yeah, Food for Fish.
A little more structured.
Yeah.
Than In God We Trust.
Yeah. But they were both really interesting. So, maybe we'll get you somewhere down the line soon to do quick reviews of those albums or recommendations on them and stuff. But I want to kind of just have a little overview of what's been going on in Steve's musical life for since its infancy, and what you like and stuff like that. So anyway, so thanks for taking these few minutes to set this up, and we'll look forward to having you review some albums.
All right, my pleasure.
All right,
thanks for having me.